Okay, I'd like to officially welcome folks to our Heat and Safety webinar today. We are Zoom from 4 to 6 p.m. We are really delighted to have our presenter from the Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health. I'm going to introduce I'll do a quick introduction of our presenter. So Rick Rabin has been a volunteer with the Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health for almost 40 years. He directed the occupational lead pioneering registry at the Massachusetts Department of Labor for over 20 years as well. He had worked and volunteered in the field of public and occupational health for over 40 years. He has given many presentations and training on health and safety for post-disaster cleanup. He has published several articles on both child and adult lead pioneering and initiated the first lawsuit against the lead paint industry. So without further delay, I'm going to pass it over to our great presenter, Rick Raven, to take over and present us today for the heat illness prevention and planning. Rick, you have the floor.
Jody, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Do you want me to start,
Oh,
Rick?
I'm sorry. I thought you were okay. I'll present
Sure.
the agenda. Very good. Okay. We're going to go over a number of things. I'm very happy to have you. Um, City of Boston has an ordinance about protecting workers, and Jody Sugarman Brosnan is going to cover that in just a minute. Heat illness and injury risk and exposure. So we're going to also talk about um, what causes people to get sick from the heat, what kinds of exposures, what are the signs and symptoms of that illness, and how do you, particularly as employers, go about preventing your employees from getting heat illness. And we'll present the outline of a plan, a heat illness prevention plan that you will need to have according to that ordinance. Next. MASCOSH, Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health. We are an organization that helps workers around workplace issues, health and safety, discrimination, workers' compensation, things like that. We give training, we advocate for them, and we help, we develop leadership of workers. And we've been around since 1976, so that's 50 years. Next.
All right, I'm gonna invite Jody.
Hey, Jody. All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna invite Jody.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much. I just put in the chat for those of you maybe on your phone or a smaller featured screen. If you don't see the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, you just click the More button and it is there available. My name is Jody Sugarman Brozan. I am the Deputy Chief in the Worker Empowerment Cabinet, and I lead the Office of Labor Compliance and Worker Protections. The Office of Labor Compliance and Worker Protections is Boston's department that protects workers. We promote labor standards and policies for workers, and this slide gives an overview of the policies and laws that we enforce. Our Boston Resident Jobs Policy, which sets hiring goals for Boston residents, people of color, and women. Our Boston Jobs Living Wage and Prevailing Wage Ordinance, which requires that all workers who are a part of a City of Boston contract of a certain size be paid a living wage. It's updated annually and $18.20, moving up on July 1. You can find out more information about that on our website. our wage theft executive order, which requires contractors to disclose previous wage and hour violations as part of their bidding on City of Boston contracts. And this heat illness and injury prevention ordinance, which is a new ordinance. We'll talk a little bit more about it. Our office also provides free worker health and safety training. You can check our website for upcoming free OSHA 10 and OSHA 30 training opportunities in multiple languages. Our calendar for this current fiscal year is actually just wrapped up, but you will be able to find a calendar of trainings in July or August for the upcoming fiscal year for those OSHA 10 and OSHA 30 trainings. And we also partner with community groups and worker centers to provide workers' rights training as well. You can go to the next slide. Oh, I'll let you do this, Rick, before I get into the details of the actual ordinance.
Okay, so by the end of this webinar, we hope that you will be able to summarize the City of Boston's ordinance about heat. You'll be able to describe the signs and symptoms and of heat illness, and also how you respond to illnesses, emergencies. You'll be able to assess the risk of people getting illnesses from the heat. And you'll be able to explain what you need to do given the different temperatures below 80, 80 to 89, and 90 and above Fahrenheit. And then you'll also be able to get started on your heat illness prevention plan. Okay, next. All right. Heat is the #1 cause among environmental problems. I should say weather problems. It causes more people to get sick and die from heat than from things like hurricanes and other kinds of weather problems. But I should also say that even though it says here 34 workers die of heat exposure every year, #1, more than 5,000 people need to stay away from work in a year from that problem. And the other thing is that, as we'll get into it, excessive heat causes people to have other kinds of problems that can be very serious illnesses and even cause death. Things like diabetes, asthma, heart problems, high blood pressure. Excessive heat contributes to all of those things. And then, as with other workplace problems, immigrants and other people who are disproportionately affected, like black and brown people, are affected greatly and much more than other people. So, for instance, black construction workers are at 1.5 times more likely to die from heat exposure than other workers. Mexican-born construction workers, and I would imagine that we're also talking about other Latin American workers as well, nearly twice as likely to die from heat exposure. Okay, and let's go back a second. It's a lot of this problem of the heat is caused by what's called climate change, whereby every year or every few years, every several years, the temperatures are increasing and making construction workers and other outdoor workers suffer considerably more. and it leads to lost productivity, lost work hours. So the problem is not just for workers individually, but it's also for employers and society in general. Next. Okay. OSHA. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It's the agency that has regulations and inspectors to enforce rules to protect workers from health and safety issues at work. OSHA has what they call an emphasis program, whereby they don't wait for complaints. They don't wait for people to die. They go to workplaces, industries that are considered high hazard. So, for instance, with heat, they go to a lot of employers, construction being one of the main ones, and they enforce the regulations around heat and other hazards. And this can also include people who work around waste collection, landscaping. Now, there is no regulation around heat. But what OSHA says and what the law says is that even if there's no particular regulation around a specific hazard like heat, the employer is still required to find a way to provide a safe and healthful workplace that's free of safety and health hazards. So there are lots of guidelines, as we're going to get into it. There's lots of information out there on how an employer can provide a safe workplace around heat. And this will help you, in fact, put together your heat illness prevention plan. Next. All right.
All right. So I'm gonna
Jody's going to take over around what the
I'm happy to.
ordinance says. Oh,
I'm here. Yep.
okay.
Good afternoon, everybody, again. So we are very excited because here in the city of Boston, we passed an ordinance, a law to protect workers from excessive heat. That law was passed in August of 2025, and it has two audiences. All City of Boston contractors, covered contractors and subcontractors for certain contracts who have workers who perform duties at a setting that could cause exposure to excessive heat must have in place a heat illness prevention plan. And they show that they will have this in place by signing what's called a heat illness prevention affidavit. In addition, City of Boston departments and certain departments must also have a heat illness prevention plan in place. This webinar is focused on covered contractors and subcontractors and any other contractors who are interested in providing these protections to their workers. And if you can go to the next slide. These are the contracts that are covered. It's starting any solicitation after May 25th. You're going to find that it will include in it the heat illness prevention affidavit and a fact sheet for covered contractors. I will put in the link put in the chat a link to our webinar so you can our website so you can get directly to our website where you can download a copy of the affidavit and the fact sheet for contractors. And you can see that it is anybody who is doing work for the city of Boston that is building and public works construction, landscaping, outdoor security services like civilian flaggers included, moving services, trash and recycling, and trash recycling collection and hauling. And one of the things that we're excited about this is we are a national model. The city of Boston is one of the few municipalities that has this in place. And the city of Boston is also a model employer because we are not just asking our contractors to do this, but we are putting our money where our mouth is, and we are doing the same for our own city of Boston employees. If you can go to the next slide. And this is a little bit about what a heat illness prevention plan is. This is a bit of a teaser because Rick is going to go into much more detail about what is included in a heat illness prevention plan. But essentially, it's going to include things like the appropriate opportunities for shade, rest, and water, actions in case of an emergency related to heat illness, and relevant training materials related to what you will be training your employees on. One of the things that is specific to the City of Boston rule is that we ask that heat illness prevention plans include two triggers. One, when the heat index, according to the National Weather Service, reaches 80 degrees, and a second when the National Weather Service reaches a heat index reaches 90 degrees. And the reason these two triggers are included is Rick will explain, there are increasing levels of protection that are needed as the temperatures get higher and higher. And 80 may seem, a heat index of 80 may seem like it is not very high, but for folks who are working outside in direct sun with personal protective gear, possibly on a surface that has reflective, like a roof or pavement, it can become quite dangerous quite quickly. These two triggers also are included in the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's proposed rule around heat. And we matched this law, our law in Boston, to the OSHA law specifically so that when that law passes and goes into effect, we know that here in Boston, we will be ready for full implementation. If you can go to the next slide. And as I said, we are not doing this without providing resources, and I will put this in the chat, but we have a new website, boston.gov/heat protections, with handouts for workers, which are required. In addition to having a heat illness prevention plan, you need to make sure as a contractor that you are handing materials out to your workers so that they know about this new law and their protections. Copies of that handout, including in 11 languages, is available on our website. There are templates for creating a heat illness prevention plan. There's a guide on how to use those templates. We are providing these webinars, and we are providing one-on-one and group technical assistance. So if you are in need of direct support, you can reach out, and there will be an email at the end of the webinar to get support on doing your heat illness prevention plan. And I believe if you go to the next slide, I turn it back here to Rick, who will be taking you through the details of understanding heat illness, injury, exposure, and the protections that you need to put in place to ensure that you and your workers are safe. Thanks, Rick.
Okay, thank you. All right, next. Okay, heat stress. That's one of the key terms, the key factors when you're talking about heat exposure. Heat stress is the exposure to extreme heat in a work environment, and it can cause serious illness, injury, and even death. There's lots of factors that go into whether or not you're experiencing heat stress. It's not just the temperature. So let's take a look at some of those factors next. All right, so just a few concepts, you might say. When you're talking about heat stress, you're looking at what is the actual temperature out there, whether it's in Fahrenheit or Celsius. What's the relative humidity? You may have noticed that on a dry day, and it's, let's say, 85 degrees, you're reasonably comfortable. But if it's on a humid day where it's, say, 60, 65% humidity, you're going to feel a lot worse, a lot hotter. And in fact, that is what is called the heat index. So we're going to get to that in a few minutes. But temperature and humidity, when you put them together, that's what you call the heat index. Radiant heat, what that means is it's just exposure to direct exposure to the source of heat. So it could be the sun, which means that you're working out in direct sunlight. You could be on a rooftop, or you could be directing traffic outside. You see, the heat index measures what the temperature is in the shade. So if it's 85 degrees, that's given in the wherever you see that temperature given, it usually means that it's in the shade. So when you step outside the shade and you're working in the heat now is much greater than what the heat index indicates. Air circulation. You're going to feel much cooler if there's a breeze, or of course, if there's any kind of ventilation, source of cooling. And then what kind of clothing, what kind of personal protective equipment are you using? If you're working around dangerous chemicals and you're wearing protective clothing, you're going to feel a lot hotter. If you have to wear a respirator, I don't know about you, but I've tried wearing a respirator at 4 hours, 6 hours a day in the heat, and it ain't no fun. Next. Other factors, okay, related to the actual work that you're doing are going to affect how hot, how much stress there is on your body from the heat. So it's how hard are you working? Are you digging a ditch, or are you just crossing the street? Well, again, I mentioned clothing and personal protective equipment. Clothing and other paraphernalia that you have to use to protect yourself from the work, from chemicals, or from falling and that kind of thing. Are you working close to radiant heat? Not just necessarily the sun, but if you're working on you could be working on a hot roof, or you could be working in a trench where there's some kind of source of heat there, pavement. If you're indoors, if you're working in a kitchen or in a bakery, there's ovens, boilers, engines, all sorts of sources of heat, in addition to whatever the temperature is out there. Again, lack of air movement, and really low access to drinking water, cooled rest areas. These are risks that you would encounter if you are out there working in the heat and you don't have an easy access to drinking water or shade. And then, of course, if there's an emergency, it would be a pretty bad risk factor, if you didn't have transportation to medical care, emergency medical care. Next. Okay. So we talked about what are the risks related to the environment? What are the risks related to the actual work that you're doing and the associated protective measures that you need to take? But there's also factors related to your personal health, your personal situation. So, for instance, if you're not used to working in the sun and the heat, you are not what they call acclimated. That means your body is not yet used to the 85, the 90, the 100 degrees that you're working in. And so that's a much greater risk for heat stress than people who are used to working out there or just used to being in the sun. If you're in poor general health, things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, asthma, and even previous heat-related illnesses. If you were made seriously ill previously from the heat, now you're more at risk for getting sick again from the heat. Uh, Drinking alcohol and a lot of caffeine um, can reduce your body's ability to deal with the heat, to adjust itself to the heat. And there's lots of prescription medicines out there that reduce your ability to adjust to the heat. There are medicines that are like antibiotics, beta blockers, diuretics, antihistamines that can reduce your ability to adjust to the heat. Next. Okay, so let's talk about the symptoms and what happens, in fact, when your body is subjected to the high temperatures. All right. Your body, as you may well know, usually functions when you're in decent health between 96.8 and 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Above that, you are considered to have a fever. Okay? Um, and when you're performing heavy work, or you've got heavy clothing on, and you are in a hot environment, your heart rate increases. Why does it do that? It does so to move your blood, uh, move it faster. And of course, that means that your heart has a greater stress on it as it continuously works hard to cool your body. Sweating increases um, when you get hot. Again, it's your body's mechanism to cool off. And then dehydration, when you are sweating, and if you don't replace it with water or other clear fluids, then your body's going to tend to go above that 100.4 degrees. And then your body will then produce these illnesses. Okay, next. Let's take a look at this little chart from on the left here, where it goes from the least severe illnesses down to the worst, down to the most extreme severe illnesses. The least severe is when you have a rash, that prickly feeling, itchy feeling. That's kind of the beginning of having an heat illness. Heat cramps when when it's hot and you don't have enough fluid, you don't have enough salts in your body, you can develop cramps. You may have seen in football games or soccer games in the middle of July or August, September, and people are the work players. Some of the players fall down. They weren't hit. Nobody hurt them or anything, but they were subject to getting heat cramps. And they taken off the field, they get hydrated, and then they can go back and play. Heat syncope, what that means is a feeling of faintness, dizziness, uh, disorientation. But the most serious illnesses are these two on the right, the heat exhaustion and the heat stroke. The exhaustion is related to these symptoms that you see: dizziness, thirst, heavy sweating, nausea, weakness. You don't necessarily have all five of those, but you do. Those are the most likely symptoms that you're going to have. What do you do about it? Well, immediately it takes that person out of the sun, out of the work, into a cool, shaded area. You loosen their clothing, you get them to sip cool water, you stay with them, and if you see that they're not getting better with these measures, you immediately call for medical help. Okay. So heat exhaustion is starting to have a pretty serious illness here. The worst, the most extreme, is the heat stroke. You're going to have, you're going to see people with confusion, dizziness, even unconsciousness, or they may have, they may be acting in a strange manner. These people now have heat stroke, and this is a potentially fatal disease. If you even suspect that they have heat stroke, just suspect, you call 911. But in the meantime, you move them to a cooler area, you loosen their clothing, and you cool them off any means possible with just cover them with water and even better with ice. You need to cool down their body right away. Again, this can cause and does cause death and permanent disability. It can affect your heart, your brain, and those problems don't go away. Next. As we really covered these, again, the heat rash, just to repeat, it's a kind of a skin irritation. Blisters, maybe small blisters. And again, just to repeat, here you want to just take them out of the heat, have them in a shaded area and drinking water, and they can only go back to work when they're completely over these symptoms. Next. Heat exhaustion. Here, a little more detailed list of the symptoms, right? Heavy sweating, extreme weakness or fatigue, dizziness, nausea, clammy, moist skin, cramps, and you would be taking their temperature and you see that it's elevated. Again, make sure they get into a cool area, lying down, elevate their legs, Remove anything that's tight or heavy kind of clothing on them, and slowly sip cool water. You don't want them to chug it down. That will not help. You need them to be slowly, gradually cooling off with cool water. Next. Heat stroke. Here your body is saying, I give up. The heat is just too extreme. I can't deal with this. I'm giving up. And so perhaps the most one of the more obvious things is they probably will be stopping the sweat. Uh, Again, that's one of the mechanisms your body has for cooling off. You probably will just stop sweating. They could be hallucinating, uh, very strong headaches, very high body temperature, like 104, 105 degrees. Again, these are life-threatening conditions. Call 911, move person to a cool shaded area, remove any excess clothing, and then douse them considerably with cold water. Next. Actually, let me go back. Let's go back to that heat stroke. I just want to say one more thing about that, and that is you need to know where. Let's go back to the heat stroke and the heat. Yeah, the heat stroke, area.
That one?
Heat stroke. That they slide that more and couple more. Up. Okay. What I want to say is the heat stroke. Um, how would I put this? I lost my train of thought. Okay, let's. Oh, yes. When you're calling 911, you need to be able to tell the person on the other line, on the other side, where exactly are you? Well, a lot of outside work involves construction, landscaping, places that you're going to be from one day to the next, somewhere else. You need to know exactly where you are so that you can tell that to the emergency people who are going to send the vehicle. So when you get to the work site, one of the things that needs to be done is somebody needs to be in charge of calling 911 and know exactly where you are. Okay, let's keep going on here. Next. Okay, there we are. Okay. So, well, there's hot. What does that mean? What does hot mean? What's too hot? Well, as I mentioned before, there's a measurement which is called the heat index. It's a composite, a mixture of both the temperature and the humidity. Again, at any given temperature, the more humid it is, the more you're going to feel hot and uncomfortable, and your body is going to react much more quickly when you have a higher heat index. Okay, so if you take a look at the little meter that's on the far left here, this is a meter that can measure the heat index. It measures the temperature and the humidity, and it gives you a readout of the so-called heat index. Next to that is a chart, which is what that meter is measuring. Okay. If you look on the horizontal line, going from 80 to 110, that's the temperature. You look at the column going down from 40 to 100, that's the relative humidity. So let me just give you an example of how important it is to know what the humidity is, to know what kind of an effect the conditions can be on your body. So if it's, let's say it's 88 degrees out, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the fifth number on the horizontal, right? 88. That's the temperature. And let's say it's 40% humidity. That's the first number going that you see going down. So if you look at 88 and the 40, it says it's that the heat index is 88, right? And so essentially the humidity had no effect on your index. It's the same as the temperature itself. All right. But let's say it's still 88 degrees, but now the humidity is 60%, something that we frequently get here in New England and Boston and Massachusetts. So you got 88 degrees temperature and you got 60% humidity. What do you have as an index? You have 95. So you went from 88 to 95. This now you working in 95, that's a whole lot. Feels a whole lot hotter than just 88. And to pile on here, okay, again, this heat index, the temperature and so forth, this is measuring what it's like, what the temperature, what the heat index is in the shade, not in direct sunlight. But if you walk out, if it's 95 heat index, and that's in the shade, if you walk out into the sun, it's going to be somewhere around 10 to 15 degrees hotter. So instead of the heat index being 95, now it's really 105 or 110. So there you can see now you're going, so you started out with the light yellow where it was just 88, and you're talking about caution, right? That light yellow. So you just need to be aware and drink water moderately. The dark yellow, which was the 95, now it's extreme caution. And now because you're not working in the shade, you're working in the sunlight, now you're in the danger zone where it's 105, 110, somewhere around there. So you can see that how much humidity there is and where you're working have a whole lot to do with how hot it feels on your body. Okay? And on the far right here is a graphic of an app. OSHA, along with its research institute, NIOSH, they have a mobile app. So if you can go onto their app, and it will give you essentially what the temperature is, what the humidity is, what the heat index is for that day in the general location where you're working. So if you get their app, you won't need that meter, and you won't need to look at a chart. Next, okay. Again, how hot is too hot? Well, work factors, right? How intense is the work that you're doing? If you're doing light work, operating equipment, or just walking around on flat ground, using light tools, and of course, traveling in a vehicle with the windows down, that's one thing. Moderate work factor is when you're carrying or using uh, equipment and supplies that are a bit heavier, 20 to 40 pounds, or maybe you're using heavy hand tools like shovels. Okay? And then if you're really working hard, heavy, that means that you're doing something where you're climbing, or you're carrying heavy supplies, you're doing heavy work, right? These again put much more of a stress on your body. Your body feels like it's hotter. And then you put that together with, is there a breeze, as it shows you down below? Is there a breeze? Are you working in the sunlight? And are you wearing uh, heavy clothing, or again, a respirator that's going to make much greater stress on your body? Next, factors related to you personally, right? How old is a worker? You know, people who are, let's say, 60, 65 years or older, aren't going to be able to deal with the heat as well as somebody who's 35, 40 years old. How's the health? Again, do they have heart problems or lung problems and that sort of thing? Um, are they taking medications that could affect the way their body is able to handle the heat? Now, clearly, you as the employer aren't going to be controlling how old the worker is, or what kind of health they're in. You can't be asking them about their personal health and about what medications they're taking. But what you can do, what you should be doing, is telling them you as the employee need to see a personal doctor to help you figure out what it is, what your risk factors, what the workers' risk factors are, and how they can minimize them, that kind of thing. Next. Now, when you're thinking about controlling heat exposure, or really when you're thinking about controlling any kind of workplace hazard, what you need to consider is how effective are the measures you're taking to control or eliminate the hazard, and in this case, the heat, right? It's called the hierarchy of controls. It's kind of like an upside down pyramid. Clearly, in general, the most effective control would be to eliminate the hazard altogether. Next would be substituting something that's still a hazard, but not as bad. Well, clearly, when you're talking about heat, those two are generally not feasible, possible. Okay. What we're talking about mainly here are engineering controls. And what that means is, and let's go down to the next slide. Okay, engineering controls means you separate the worker from the hazard. So you separate the worker from the heat. How do you do that? Well, if you're inside, um, increase the air circulation using fans, as long as it's below 98 degrees, or shields, like if there's ovens or some kind of other operation where you have a specific source of heat, having shields, air conditioning, obviously, and that's possible, or what's called local ventilation. And what that means is if you're working on something that itself is generating heat, you have a you have a duct connected with a fan that's going to be sucking out the air away from the worker. So it's drawing the heat or the steam away from the worker. Next. Administrative controls. So in a sense, that's changing the way people do the work. All right. What does that mean, change the way that? Well, one way to do that is to get workers acclimatized, which I mentioned earlier, meaning that since they're not used to, let's say, 95 degrees out there, you have them start on the first day working 20%, either 20% of the day or 20% of the work that they do is in that extreme heat. And then you gradually, over the period of at least a week, increase their workload, whether it's how hard they work or simply the length of time that they're working, right? So that's acclimatizing people. That's one way. And it's extremely important. It's just as important as the water, as the shade, as the rest, if not more important. The body needs time to get used to the heat. So that's one way of climatizing. Next. You might also, instead of working, let's say, from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, when it's the hottest, you have them work earlier in the day, or you have people start work later in the day, or you simply have people changing up the work that they do so that they're only working, let's say, half the day in the direct sunlight. So you have people changing off. Maria starts at 8 and works from 8 to 12 in the hot sun, and John works the hot part from 12 to 4, something like that. So you reduce the amount of time that they work in the hot sun. Next. Clearly, people need to have cool drinking water. Now, what the ordinance, what the proposed OSHA standard says is this: if people are in the heat index of 80 to 89, then you the employer, need to make the water available and encourage workers to drink, and as it indicates here, about a cup every 15 to 20 minutes. So it's about a quart every hour. And also encourage them to replace the electrolytes, the salt that people lose through the sweat, and that can be through liquids that have those electrolytes, or just small snacks that they have during the day. If it's 90 or above, then this kind of offering is not optional, it's required. You, as the employer, require people to take these measures, to take the rest, to take the water. Next. Right? Rest. Again, so we've talked about water, we talk about rest. Here again, the hotter it is, the higher the heat index, the more time people are going to need to rest in any given period. So, for instance, if people are doing that light work and the heat index is 112, right? So now this is in the area of definitely of danger, right? So if light work, they can take their usual breaks, whatever people have been taking. Medium amount of intensity. Now, for in any given hour, people need to rest 35 minutes. And if it's heavy work, they need to rest 45 minutes in any given hour, right? So what you're saying is medium, you're working 25 minutes in an hour. And when it's very heavy work, and again, this danger area of heat index, when it's heavy work, you're only working 15 minutes in an hour. Now, you may chuckle or at that, but 112 index is extremely dangerous. It is very, you're putting people at tremendous risk of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Next. And of course, when people take their breaks, it needs to be in shade. So if they're in construction or they're out in the field, or they're doing landscaping and there's no obvious shade under trees or so forth, you can put up canopy, these portable canopies, not a big deal. People need to be protected from the radiant heat of the sun. Next. All right. Again, kind of a summary here of what needs to be done under at different levels of heat index. Again, at below 80, it's considered a pretty low risk from the heat, and you just pretty much go about your normal business. I mean, but remember, people, whether they're working in an office or they're working outside, periodically should be drinking water and taking their usual rest. But when you hit 80 to 89, then you are, as the employer, required to provide the cool drinking water and the shade, and to acclimatize people, allowing their bodies to adjust to the heat. And then 95 and above, mandatory rest breaks with water and shade. make sure somebody is designated to call the 911 number and knows exactly where you are. Monitor that person who's if somebody gets ill from this. Um, the particular reason to have somebody um, with the person who's the victim is they can easily, quickly get worse without hardly any warning. And so you need somebody there. And indeed, even when they're working, having a buddy system, meaning that Maria keeps her eye on John and John keeps his eye on Maria to see that they are that they're not getting sick. Because sometimes, very often, you may not notice that you're getting worse. You're getting worse, that you're acting strange, that maybe your skin isn't sweating like it was before, all these kinds of things. So you need to have a buddy system. Next. You need, as an employer, to get ready for any possible heat illness. Workers need to be trained to know what the signs and symptoms of heat illness are. You need to have first aid equipment on site, which in the case of heat would involve cold packs, thermometer, heat, heart rate monitor, all these things specifically to deal with heat. Again, the phone number and the address of the nearest medical facility. Again, knowing where you are, and if it's not an address like 91 Main Street and you're out in a rural area, then you need to know the GPS coordinates. And again, somebody designated to handle emergencies. Next. Just another summary of how you respond to heat illness. If somebody has mild symptoms, such as the cramps or the skin feeling, getting those bumps and so forth, just water, rest, shade, relieving them of any kind of unnecessary clothing, personal protective equipment, so forth. If somebody has moderate symptoms, now if you're talking about heat exhaustion, water, rest, shade, all of that, cool packs, spray bottle, monitoring their heart rate, and making sure they don't return to work until they are completely back to normal with their temperature and symptoms. And then when they have severe symptoms, or you think they might be having severe symptoms, 911, get people into shade, drinking water, removing excess clothing, and cooling them off with cold packs, neck, groin, armpits. Okay. Next. Okay, so now we have a heat illness prevention plan. Again, as OSHA will require when their regulation comes into effect, and as the Boston ordinance calls for, you need to have a written heat illness prevention plan. The plan needs to address how you're going to be monitoring people or monitoring the environmental conditions. What are you going to do to acclimatize people for the heat? The work, what are their work rest schedules on any given day, on any given condition? Remember, if you start work at 8 o'clock in the morning, it might be 75 degrees, let's say, so no big deal. But it's supposed to hit 90 later in the day. Now it's a different issue. Now the whole you need to have a schedule of when people are going to take their work, do their work, and have their rest under those conditions. Have a buddy system, and then again protocols for emergencies and first aid. So this all needs to be put down in writing. Everybody who's affected, all the employees need to be trained on this. They need to be informed on the overall plan, and then any specific conditions, specific measures to be taken that day under those conditions. What needs to be done? What do people need to know when it's 90 degrees out there as opposed to just 75? Next. All right. What would be good is to have your plan indicate what happens before the shift, during the shift, even after the shift. And for instance, before the shift, what needs to be done is take a look. What is the forecast? Know what the forecast is for that day, so you know what measures need to be taken, such as water, where's the shade, who's going to call for emergencies. These are things that the supervisor or manager needs to do. Before the work begins, something that the supervisor and the crew, the individual workers, need to have is to review the symptoms, make sure the water is available. People need to know that they're expected to be in the shade and drink and so forth under what conditions. Next. During the shift, the supervisor has to be able to communicate when there are changes in the heat index, enforce breaks, and then when there are concerns expressed by workers, or the supervisor sees some conditions that were not properly addressed, either in the plan or in the implementation, to note those things down. The crew, individual workers, again, with their buddies, observing symptoms, and then also communicating concerns to the supervisor. And then afterwards, if there was somebody who got sick, was there first aid? Did the emergency services get called in a timely way? Or in other words, was everything done the way it was supposed to be done? We all know that it's one thing to have a plan, a policy in writing, and then it's another to actually implement it in the field. Next. Right. These again, these are just expressing what we just went over in a slightly different way. The plan, the heat illness prevention plan, um, should indicate who's doing the training, who's providing maybe refresher training, who's responsible for making sure that everything in the plan is indeed being implemented. And again, the measures that need to be taken at those two different heat indices are being done. In other words, is what needs to be done at 85 to 90, 85 to 89, is that being done? And 90 to 90 and above are those precautions, those procedures being followed, meaning procedures for weather monitoring, water availability, and drinking, rest, shade, et cetera, et cetera. Is all of this really being done? Next. Okay, the daily job site plan. Again, in construction and most work that's being done outside, you can be in a different location, or you can have different environmental conditions change from hour to hour, day to day. So you need to have your plan needs to take account of those things. Have a daily on-site briefing. In other words, before people go out to work, what they call a lunchbox talk, where you just go over what needs to be done or not done that day doing that work. Right? Make sure you got that number for the EMS, for the local hospital, making sure all that water and the rest and the cooling shade locations are identified. Again. Next. I won't go over all these. I mentioned these. This is just, again, a summary of what supervisors need to do, to know, or to make sure that they do indeed happen. These are your responsibilities as supervisors. Next. Same idea for employees. What employees need to know and do or not do under different conditions. It's really important that employees, they may have been working for contractor A for 5 years before they came to you, and maybe they were very lax around safety or lax around heat illness prevention. Or people come to you and they have kind of a macho attitude where, I don't want to be a sissy, I can take the heat, et cetera, et cetera. You have to set them straight that this is different working for you. You are considered a good employee if you follow the precautions for staying safe. Next. Okay, so
Okay.
maybe some questions, comments come to mind. We'd like to see that in the chat and or the Q&A.
Sure. So thank you, Rick, for the presentation and also to our attendee for attending today's webinars as well. So just a reminder, if you are having any question, please feel free to put it in the chat, or if you just click if you look at the very bottom of your page, if you're from like a phone, there's an option for me to click more, and then there's a Q&A feature on that platform where you can also type in your question. But folk who are familiar with the chat features here on a Zoom platform, please feel free to put the question in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and then Rick will kind of go through that question.